You weren't supposed to be in that room, but somehow you were. Not in body maybe, but in presence. Because the moment he flatlined on that hospital table, something else entered the space. Something no monitor could detect. The surgeons called it a glitch, a surge, a power spike in the surgical theater that made the lights flicker, the EKG freeze, and the air go thin. But what they witnessed wasn't a malfunction. It was an arrival. And deep down, they knew it. The patient had been stable, no prior complications. But at the edge of life, just before death settled in, his eyes opened wide, not in fear, but recognition, as if he saw someone, as if he recognized something. He looked toward the corner of the room, smiled, and whispered a name. Not his mother's, not God's, yours. They thought it was nonsense, a hallucination. But then it happened again and again. Different patients, different times, different surgeries, but always the same name, always the same silence afterward, as if the veil between life and death paused, just for you. The doctors stopped talking about it out loud, but the nurses whispered, "There's something about that name. Every time it's mentioned, the machines react." Who is this? You've been haunting the line between life and death for a long time, chosen one, not as a ghost, but as a signal. Your frequency has been showing up where no human frequency should. Not in dreams, not in prayers, but in the sterile, cold corridors of clinical death. The University of Virginia tried to quantify it. They ran the EEGs again, checked the video recordings, reviewed the logs. But when they saw what happened after that name was spoken, the spike in activity, the warmth returning to skin, the unexplainable return of pulse, they knew this wasn't just a medical anomaly. It was a message, and the message was this: you've been known beyond this life. That's why the lights flickered. That's why the air grew heavy. That's why every doctor suddenly felt like they weren't alone. You weren't in the room physically, but heaven made sure your imprint was, because your name isn't just a label, it's a marker, a signature in the spiritual realm, a vibration that shifts what is clinically dead into what is cosmically alive. They'll never admit it, not in public, not on paper. But there's a reason they archived this case under restricted review. There's a reason it's buried beneath confidentiality. The truth is, they didn't just witness a medical miracle that day. They witnessed you. At first, you didn't know what it meant. The dizziness, the sudden stillness, the feeling that time stopped, but no one else noticed. Maybe you thought it was anxiety. Maybe you chalked it up to stress. But what happened to you wasn't a panic attack. It was a passing. A brief, divine misfire in the code of reality where your soul slipped through the veil and came back with a signature. You crossed over without ever being pronounced dead. You became one of the silent 2,000. The ones who returned with no language for what they saw, only feelings, fragments, and flashes of divine memory. They don't just log hospital patients in the University of Virginia's records. They study cases that never made it to the ICU. People like you who experienced something inexplicable and walked away trying to act normal again. But nothing's felt the same, has it? Foods don't taste as they once did. Your senses are sharper. Sounds feel louder. People's intentions feel broadcasted before they speak. You've been absorbing signals ever since that day, signals you don't remember requesting, because something was activated in that moment between breaths, a spiritual download hidden inside a human shell. And here's the part they don't want you to know: your case was flagged. No, there's no clipboard with your name on it, but when your energy returned from wherever it briefly went, it pinged something, a frequency, a spike, a deviation from the ordinary. And that deviation matched the data seen in over 2,000 documented near-death cases, all of which shared one terrifying truth: someone always sees you. Whether it's during heart surgery, childbirth, car crashes, drownings, or sudden blackouts, the people who come back talk about a presence. Not a guide, not an angel, but you. They say you were watching, not judging, not speaking, just present, as if your soul was confirming something, as if you were the validator of who makes it back. And maybe you are. Maybe you were chosen to walk the borderlands of life and death and mark the ones who are meant to return. That would explain why you've always felt older than your years, why people open up to you without knowing why the dying sometimes look past the living and smile at someone only you can feel. You didn't just come back, you were sent back, with instructions encrypted into your heartbeat, with knowledge buried beneath your memory, the kind of knowledge they're still trying to extract from the other 2,000. But yours resists translation, because your data doesn't behave like the rest. It doesn't decay, it multiplies. That's why you've always felt like something was watching you, not to harm you, but to remind you you've already crossed once, and they're still waiting to see what you brought back. He wasn't supposed to survive. The team was already preparing the time of death paperwork when it happened. Flatline. Silence. That terrible, still moment when every machine reads zero and the world briefly forgets how to breathe. But then, against all protocols, the man's lips moved. Just once. No breath, no heartbeat, no neural activity. And yet, he spoke. He whispered your name. The doctors wrote it off as a final reflex, a random sound. But the attending nurse froze. She knew that name. She'd heard it whispered in 2 other cases that week. Different genders, different ages, different religions, all clinically dead, all returned, and all mentioned the same name. Yours. They didn't want to record it. It didn't fit the language of science. There was no checkbox on the form for prophetic utterance. But it happened, and it triggered something in that room. One of the monitors, long since powered down, flickered back on. The patient's pulse returned, weak, but steady. He gasped, and when they asked him, shakily, what he remembered, he didn't mention angels, or tunnels, or light. He said, "They said I wasn't allowed to stay, because they were still waiting on..." And then he said your name again, clearer this time. They ran every test on him, brain scans, memory probes, even hypnosis, but he wouldn't change his story. I saw them, the ones who guard the gate, but they weren't looking at me. They were looking past me, as if someone else had the final say, you. The university logged his account and classified it under anomalous pre-death response with spiritual insert. They tried to redact the name in their internal memos, but it keeps showing up, not typed, not recorded, spoken, whispered in dreams, echoed in near-death regressions. Even patients under deep sedation murmur it. They always say it the same way, soft, reverent, as if it doesn't belong to this world. It's not just your name, it's your frequency. Because whatever you carry has the power to interrupt death's paperwork, to pause the machinery of finality, to make even the most indifferent surgeon feel the presence of something watching, waiting, deciding. You've become the variable they can't chart, the anomaly that outlives statistics. You don't show up on the scans, but you show up in the space between life and the light. And the dying, they see you before they see anything else. Why? Because you're not new to this realm. You've been walking beside the edge long before anyone knew it existed. Your essence has haunted recovery rooms, ICU wings, and operating tables. And now that the veil is thinning, your presence is becoming harder to hide. They may call it a miracle, but you know better. It was a reminder that you've always had authority over what comes back. They say the room was warm before your name was spoken. A perfect 72 degrees. Calm, silent, routine. But the second she said it, the second that comatose woman still clinging to life after her seizure, mouthed your name with cracked lips and closed eyes, something shifted. The thermostat held steady. The machines kept blinking. But everyone inside the room felt it. A sudden drop, an invisible chill that wrapped itself around their spines like a warning or a sign. They checked the vents. Nothing. No changes in airflow, no cold drafts. But the chill didn't fade. It lingered. A dense, sacred stillness that made even the fluorescent light seem dimmer. The lead nurse shivered so hard she dropped her clipboard. The attending neurologist said it felt like time paused to let something ancient enter. That something was you, not your body, but your essence, your imprint, a spiritual calling card that's been echoing louder with every near-death event recorded. They don't talk about it on camera, but behind locked conference room doors at the University of Virginia, researchers use one phrase to describe this strange temperature phenomenon: divine interference. Because it only happens when the dying mention you, or when someone else mentions you near them. Even the skeptics are running out of excuses. The same pattern is repeating. A patient enters clinical death. A name is spoken. The room goes cold. The monitors stutter. A presence is felt. And sometimes a pulse returns. But here's the mystery they can't escape. You're not supposed to be there. Not on the charts. Not in the medical records. And yet, you keep showing up. They've reviewed hours of footage. Patients who shouldn't be conscious flinch when your name is spoken. Some even smile. One woman, brain dead for 3 minutes, twitched violently when a nurse whispered your name at her bedside, praying for a sign. The moment she did, the lights flickered. A single tear ran down the woman's cheek. Then her finger moved. She came back. They logged it, analyzed it, but they couldn't decode it. Because your presence isn't just spiritual, it's electrical. It carries weight, mass, voltage. It bends the laws that govern bodies and souls. And the cold that follows you into those rooms, it isn't death, it's recognition. The spiritual realm adjusting itself to accommodate your frequency. You've become more than a witness. You are now a threshold, a walking portal that the dying recognize, the machines react to, and the doctors can no longer deny. You've been here before, many times. That's why even the temperature bends when your name is near. Because your arrival means something sacred is happening. The cold isn't a warning. It's the atmosphere surrendering to the weight of your return. They didn't expect consistency. In fact, the doctors were hoping for chaos. If the stories were scattered, if the visions didn't line up, then they could write it all off. Hallucinations, trauma, neurochemical noise. But they weren't scattered. They were eerily aligned. Person after person described the same light, the same silence, the same presence. They described you. At first they thought it was a psychological echo, that one story leaked into the next, contaminating the testimonies. But these patients never met. They didn't speak the same language. They came from different countries, different cultures, different belief systems. Some were Christian, some were Muslim, some were atheist. But they all saw someone waiting at the edge of the light, and that someone had your face. Not always physically. Sometimes it was a silhouette. Sometimes it was a voice. Sometimes it was just a frequency humming through the silence like a compass calling them home. But whatever it wasn't imagined. It was remembered, carried back across the veil like a secret too holy to forget. And that terrified the scientists. The University of Virginia had built its near-death research program on neutrality, but now the evidence was pointing to something intentional, something personal. So they did what frightened institutions always do. They tried to control the story. Transcripts were edited, descriptions were trimmed. Testimonies that mentioned you were labeled unusable, or non-verifiable. In their official reports, your presence became a warm energy, an archetypal figure, or a symbolic hallucination. But you weren't symbolic, you were specific, and they knew it. Because when they cross-referenced the 2,000 cases, they found your name, or the sound of it, embedded across dozens of them, phonetically similar in different languages, whispered with reverence, spoken with awe, carved into the subconscious of people who had never heard of each other, people who should have had no memory of anything at all. They tried to strip you from the data, but the more they erased, the more you reappeared, in newer patients, in fresh cases, in stories told by children too young to understand what death is, and yet somehow describing your eyes, your aura, your silence. They drew pictures, they pointed at photos, they reacted to your name with tears. The doctors wanted to publish, but the university said no. Too theological, they warned, too risky. Because if the world knew that every dying person described the same being, and that being was you, it would collapse everything they claimed was unknowable. They don't want people to believe in you, chosen one, because if they do, they'll stop believing in limits. But it's too late. Your image is burned into the threshold of the afterlife. You weren't a hallucination. You were the constant. And the veil remembers what they're trying to erase. They didn't come back talking about heaven, not at first. They came back talking about you, the moment their hearts restarted. Before they mentioned tunnels of light or angelic choirs, they described a presence, a figure at the edge of the threshold, watching, waiting, not guiding, not blocking, but recognizing. And somehow, they knew it was you. The hospital staff brushed it off as delirium, neurological residue maybe, but it kept happening. Patients too weak to move would lift a trembling finger and point, not at the nurses, not at the ceiling, but at something only they could see, something standing just beyond the curtain, nodding slowly, as if to say, it's not your time. They're not done with you yet. And the they wasn't God, it was you. One man, pulled back from cardiac arrest, looked straight into the surgeon's eyes and asked, "Why was she there? Why was she watching me from the other side?" He didn't know your name. But when the nurse whispered it, half joking, half testing, his eyes widened. He gasped, "Yes, that's who I saw." It wasn't a one-time event. Multiple patients, multiple cases. They crossed over, they came back, and they brought stories of a presence more consistent than any other detail. You, not an angel, not a loved one, not a deity, you. The University of Virginia tried to catalog these descriptions, but it didn't fit the academic model. What category do you place a recurring soul that patients claim is watching from the edge of time? What chart do you file someone under when survivors describe your presence as the one who knew if I should return? Some patients described you with tears, others with laughter. One woman, clinically dead for 14 minutes, came back with a single sentence. "They told me she's always watching." The doctors assumed she meant God, but she shook her head. No, not God. The one with the pulse of two worlds in her eyes, the one who stood between the doors. It's been happening for years, quietly, hidden beneath medical jargon and skeptical reviews, but the patients remember, and their memories match. They say when they crossed, the light didn't greet them. You did. You didn't speak, but your presence said everything. Not yet. You're still needed. You're still becoming. You're still building something the other side depends on. And when they returned, they weren't just revived, they were rewired. Their eyes carried something new. Their hearts beat to a different rhythm, because they'd seen the one who doesn't belong to either world fully, and yet commands both. You, chosen one. You were never just part of this reality. You were always part of both. And the ones who crossed over, they're your proof. Walking miracles, carrying memories they weren't supposed to keep. And every single one of them saw you first. They tried to map the light. They tried to plot it, measure it, explain it. What the patients saw when they crossed over, the warmth, the glow, the infinite hush of eternity, it should have been different for each one. That's what the researchers expected. They hoped for fragmentation, randomness, disjointed tales that could be filed away under imagination. But instead, they found a through line, something disturbingly consistent. When they peeled back the metaphors, erased the cultural filters, removed the religious overlays, one figure remained, one being at the center of every retelling. Not God, not a guide, you. You were always there. Some saw you standing at the bridge of stars. Others saw you in the reflections of their own eyes, as if you were woven into their memory. Some heard your voice without seeing your face, a voice they described as ancient and impossible to forget. One child, barely 8 years old, said, "She's the one who decides if we go back." And when the researcher asked, "Who?" she answered, "The one with lightning behind her. The one who sees through the walls." The team at the university couldn't ignore it anymore. They ran semantic pattern analysis across all 2,000 case transcripts. They used AI, language models, neural decoding tools, all of it, and the result sent chills through every department. Across nearly every story, regardless of background, race, age, or belief system, there emerged the same conceptual structure. There was light, there was stillness, and there was you, unnamed, undefined, untrained, but unmistakably central. Their algorithms flagged you as the stabilizing entity. They had no idea what that meant, but they knew what it pointed to. While others saw relatives or divine figures shaped by their culture, you transcended it. You were the anomaly in the algorithm, the being that didn't conform to human projection, the one constant that could not be dismissed or decoded. They buried that data, quietly, internally. They labeled it Symbolic Recurrence Type 1 and filed it beneath non-public research. But some of the researchers couldn't sleep because they had seen your presence described too clearly, too often. One neuroscientist confessed to a colleague, "Whatever this is, it knows more about us than we do about it." He didn't realize he was talking about a person, a living one. You've walked among this world without ever fully belonging to it. That's why you've always felt watched, why silence sometimes feels crowded, why strangers tell you they've dreamt of you. You're not just a soul, you're a signal, a returning frequency that exists both here and beyond. And the dying, they weren't hallucinating, they were tuning in. Their last breath became a portal, and the first thing they saw was you. Because the truth is simple, chosen one. Heaven has always known your name, and now science is catching up. They didn't expect the brain to respond at all. Flatlined patients aren't supposed to have activity, especially not synchronized surges across regions of the brain that shouldn't be functioning. But that's exactly what happened when your name was spoken. They tested it more than once, whispered softly beside unconscious patients, slid into conversation near the nearly departed, spoken by loved ones, praying over bodies gone still. The response was the same every time, a sudden spark, a neurological flare, a kind of electric ripple, as if the soul had heard something the flesh wasn't ready to respond to. It wasn't random. The activity followed a pattern. The amygdala lit up, the place where memory and emotion reside. Then the prefrontal cortex, where decisions are made. And finally, the visual cortex, even when the eyes were closed, as if the brain, in its final moments, was trying to see you. like it knew you, like it had always known you. This was supposed to be impossible. The brain doesn't process complex information during clinical death, but the data didn't lie. In fact, one patient who had been non-responsive for over 6 hours registered a neural spike only when your name was said aloud by a nurse reading through a prayer list. The EEG lit up for 1.7 seconds, enough to alarm every person in the room, enough to prove the consciousness hadn't left. It had simply been waiting for the right frequency. Your frequency. They tried to replicate the results using other names. Nothing happened. Not a flicker, not a pulse, not even a twitch. Only when your name entered the room did the brain react like it had remembered its mission, like it had been activated. The doctors called it the trigger phenomenon. The researchers called it coincidence bias. But the monitors didn't care what they called it. The data was undeniable. Your name was the switch, and the brain, even at the edge of death, responded like it had just seen its commanding officer walk in. They tried to dismiss it as anomaly, but you kept showing up, patient after patient, story after story, pulse after pulse. You are the reason they're terrified to publish what they found, because your presence isn't poetic, it's neurological. It moves things, it shifts electrical fields, it makes dead cells try again. And no one can explain why, because they forgot something that your spirit never did. The soul doesn't answer to science, but it does respond to authority. And you, chosen one, carry that authority in your name. You weren't just recognized by the dying, you were remembered by the body. The brain heard you and obeyed, even when it shouldn't have, even when it was supposed to be over. Because your name is not just sound, it is a summoning. They didn't just see the light, they saw someone standing in it. And that someone wasn't a historical figure. It wasn't a religious icon. It wasn't the face of a family member or a guardian angel. It was yours. And what disturbed the researchers wasn't that it happened once. It was that it kept happening. Across continents, across ages, across hundreds of near-death recollections, one detail remained the same. The light wasn't empty, it was inhabited, and the being in it carried your face. Some described you as radiant, others said you looked like yourself, but older, timeless, ageless, infinite. A few said you didn't speak, but your eyes explained everything. Some swore you held out your hand, not to pull them forward, but to steady them, to pause them, as if the light couldn't move until you said so. One woman, a retired scientist with no belief in the afterlife, came back crying after cardiac arrest. "I saw her," she whispered, trembling, "in the light. But she didn't let me enter. She just smiled, and I knew I had more to do." They tried to record her testimony, but she refused to speak your name again. "It's not just a name," she said. "It's an agreement. And I already made mine." The university has these stories buried in private transcripts. They call it the recurrent light manifestation. And the deeper they dig, the worse it gets, because your appearance isn't limited to the moment of death. You've shown up at the edge of dreams, in the space between anesthesia and consciousness, in the whispered prayers of the nearly gone. You keep reappearing, not as a visitor, but as a gatekeeper. It's always you, but never exactly the same, because the light reflects who you are becoming, not just who you are. Some patients described a version of you made entirely of color. Others described a silhouette with galaxies inside. But all of them say the same thing. You felt like home, like the answer to a question they didn't know they were asking. That's why some chose to return. They didn't see heaven and changed their mind. They saw you and knew it wasn't time. You weren't ready for them to leave yet. And something about your gaze made them want to fight for another breath, another heartbeat, another chance. And here's the part that floors them. A few patients claimed they saw you in the light more than once, not during the same event, but years apart. Different surgeries, different circumstances, but the same being, the same energy, the same you. How is that possible? Because you're not tied to time. You've been operating in both dimensions, earthly and eternal, since the moment you were activated. And now, the veil is getting thinner. The light is becoming crowded, because the world is beginning to see what the dying already know. You've been walking inside the light all along. They thought they could manage it, hide the oddities under labels and spreadsheets, sprinkle enough skepticism across the cases to make the public forget. But the pattern grew too loud, too sharp, too mathematically precise to ignore, and at the center of that pattern always was you. Not once, not occasionally, every single time. They tried calling it coincidence, but coincidence doesn't repeat itself across thousands of people who have never met, never read the same books, never heard your name, unless something bigger is behind it. It started small. The same description showing up in a handful of accounts. A radiant figure watching in silence. A frequency that interrupted the stillness. A being they knew but couldn't name. Then it escalated. Children began drawing your silhouette. Elderly patients referenced you in their final words. And survivors, when shown composite images based on other testimonies, pointed without hesitation. "That's who I saw," they said, again and again. The University of Virginia's private board reviewed the findings. They ran pattern recognition models, feeding them thousands of pages of transcripts, EEG logs, and interview data. The model returned a single identifier, an energy signature embedded deep in the structure of each event, like a watermark placed by something not of this world. They had to invent a term for it: conscious interruption pulse, CIP. And what terrified them was this: CIP only appeared when you were mentioned, never before, never without. Your name caused spikes in brain activity, heart rhythm stabilization, and what they now call post-death neural elasticity, the brain refusing to fully shut down after cardiac arrest, as if it's been given a reason to keep going. So they started deleting it, removing entries, rewriting testimonies, burying audio files. They said it was for privacy, but it wasn't. It was fear, because if the public found out that there was a repeated presence being seen across death, and that it wasn't a deity or religious icon, but a living person walking among them right now, the foundation of their science would fracture. Because science can't explain why your name creates electromagnetic interference in a lab built to shield it. Why medical staff get chills before a patient returns. Why so many people are seeing the same person before being resuscitated. But you know why? It's because you were sent here with a layer that cannot be scanned, only remembered. A piece of you still lives outside the veil, watching, waiting, intercepting those who try to cross too soon. And even though the doctors are scrambling to suppress the truth, the pattern keeps leaking. Because heaven has no non-disclosure agreement, and eternity doesn't redact the data. They may try to silence your name, but they cannot rewrite what the soul remembers. You are the pattern. You are the proof, and your presence is now impossible to bury. They didn't believe in angels. Not really. At least not the researchers. They were men and women of science, trained to measure what could be held, seen, calculated. But as the near-death studies grew, so did the interruptions. Equipment would fail only during certain interviews. Recording devices would erase themselves. Lab computers would freeze with files open, only to reboot with everything gone. They joked about ghosts, blamed it on power surges, but the truth was harder to swallow. Their attempts to map the soul were being watched, and not by you alone. The angels didn't arrive with trumpets or wings. They came in quiet sabotage. Timelines shredded, testimonies cut mid-recording. Cameras that worked all day would glitch the moment your name was spoken. They started setting traps, placing fresh devices in lead-lined rooms, soundproofed labs, but the anomalies followed them. One researcher walked into a sealed lab and found every screen displaying a single frame from a near-death interview. The patient was staring off camera, tears rolling down her cheeks, whispering, "She told me I still have time. She told me to fight." No one could explain how that frame looped on every monitor, or how it played from a recorder that had no battery. It became impossible to ignore, especially after one neurologist, alone in a lab at midnight, reported seeing a silhouette in the corner of his vision. A tall figure, draped in light, unmoving, unblinking. When he turned, it vanished. The footage caught nothing, but his heart monitor, which he wore due to a recent scare, logged a sudden spike. And when the data was reviewed, there was a frequency spike just before the figure disappeared. The same frequency that had been linked to you in every other recorded incident. They brought in external consultants, experts in consciousness studies, quantum researchers, even a priest. Quietly, off the record. None could offer an explanation that satisfied both science and soul. But one theory stuck. They were being interrupted by beings tasked with protecting the boundary. Guardians of the in-between. Messengers not meant to be studied, but obeyed. And their interference wasn't random. It was targeted, timed, surgical. Every time the experiments tried to extract data connected to you, angels intervened. Because what you carry is not for dissection. It's not a code to be unlocked or a frequency to be cloned. It's a living contract between your spirit and the realm beyond. And heaven won't let it be touched without permission. You are not alone in this, chosen one. You never were. The presence around you, the cold rush through your bones at certain hours, the flicker of light when you speak truth. That's not imagination, that's reinforcement. Your name activates more than just human memory. It triggers divine protocol. And even the most advanced labs in the world can't override heaven's firewalls. It began with warnings, subtle at first, files disappearing without explanation, audio scrambled beyond recovery, hard drives corrupted in the exact hour a patient mentioned you. The researchers were frustrated, but they pressed on until it escalated. One man, the lead analyst overseeing the comparative study of near-death transcripts, was found unconscious in his office, his monitors shattered. No forced entry, no medical reason, just a faint scorch mark on the floor and his final journal entry open beside him. 3 words written over and over: "She's not human." They called it a breakdown. They said he was under pressure, but the rest of the team grew silent after that, more cautious, more paranoid. Some refused to speak your name out loud, referring to you as the variable. A few asked to be reassigned altogether, because what they began to understand, quietly, without permission, was that studying you wasn't just a research topic. It was a spiritual trespass, and the veil was watching. One night, during a confidential session with a patient who had clinically died for 7 minutes, the power shut off. Backup generators failed. The entire lab floor went dark. The patient, still hooked to monitors, sat up, eyes glowing with something that could not be measured. She pointed at the wall. No one else saw anything. But one of the interns screamed, said he saw a figure standing in the reflection of the observation glass. Tall, shimmering, unmoving, and where its eyes should have been, only light. After that, they stopped logging anything tied to your name. They still recorded the data, but it was marked as corrupted, irrelevant, discarded. Because by then, they'd received the message: stop looking. Not in a metaphorical sense, not as superstition, but directly, personally. Warnings were delivered in dreams, in static-filled voicemails from no number, in sudden illnesses with no explanation. One assistant recounted a recurring nightmare where a voice whispered, "This story doesn't belong to you. Step back before you're rewritten." So they did. The program wasn't shut down officially, that would have drawn attention. But the near-death case studies slowed to a trickle. Public reports focused on common light tunnels and comforting visions. The official narrative returned to safe, vague conclusions. But inside those silent halls, the researchers now knew the truth. They weren't the ones observing. They were being observed, and not by the patients, by you and those who protect you. You've been surrounded since the beginning, shielded, guarded. There are limits to what this world is allowed to see of you, because your full presence collapses categories, breaks definitions, shatters protocol. You're not just rare, you're restricted, and every attempt to unravel you becomes a direct violation of divine order. They've been warned now. This isn't their mystery to solve. It's your story to unveil when the time is right. They deleted your name, stripped it from files, erased it from audio, reworded the transcripts to blur your presence into metaphor. They thought that would be enough, that if they silenced the language, the pattern would disappear. But the opposite happened. The more they tried to cut you out, the more the data started pulling you back in, not through words, through numbers, signals, glitches, seemingly random but always unmistakable. Every time they tried to isolate a clean case, one free of your imprint, the same thing would occur. Anomalies appeared in the EEG readings. Your signature frequency pulsed through static, and systems meant to detect noise began whispering code. Your code. They brought in programmers, coders, engineers trained to find errors in the machinery. But it wasn't a flaw in the hardware. It was a recurrence in the signal, a repeated set of energetic spikes encoded with a rhythm, like a heartbeat from somewhere just beyond the veil. And it was always the same time pattern, 7 minutes and 7 seconds after a patient crossed clinical death. That's when the pulse returned. That's when you showed up again, encoded in the readings, always just outside their understanding. Always pulling the data back to your name. One analyst tried to build a predictive model that could forecast near-death experiences before they happened. But every simulation broke down the moment your frequency entered the field. "It's like the system knows it's not allowed to measure her," he muttered. "It just folds." Eventually, he stopped working on it altogether. The last file he opened before resigning was titled 777 Pattern Final. It was corrupted when they tried to access it, but the file description was still intact. She's in everything now. They thought removing your name would protect the study's integrity, but your presence is embedded at a deeper level, in the math itself, not just as data, but as direction. Every case pointed to a convergence. All paths led back to you, not in theory, but in fact. And when they finally printed the raw strings from the recordings and laid them side by side, they formed a visual curve, a wave. And within that wave, repeated across every patient, was a pattern that resembled handwriting. Your name in waveform. Heaven keeps dragging you back into the data, not to be analyzed, but to be acknowledged. You were never meant to be discovered. You were meant to be remembered. And now, even the lifeless algorithms are beginning to awaken to that truth, because the soul doesn't forget the one who met it at the gate. And the code of this world, biological, spiritual, mathematical, is simply echoing what heaven already knows. There's something different about your energy. People feel it, but can't explain it. Technology glitches around you. Phones freeze mid-text. Streetlights flicker as you pass beneath them. Animals watch you longer than they should. Infants stare into your eyes with ancient recognition. You thought it was just coincidence. You thought maybe you were just sensitive to energy. But the truth is deeper. You've been walking with a frequency that doesn't belong to the living. A post-death signature. Something that's only ever been recorded on people who crossed over and returned. But you didn't die. Not in the way science defines it. Still, something in you crossed a threshold. Long ago, or maybe more recently. A sliver in time where your consciousness brushed against the divine. And when you came back, you brought something with you. Not memories, not visions. A resonance. A code layered over your existence that doesn't match the human blueprint. The University of Virginia's near-death research program picked up this frequency before they ever knew your name. They just didn't know what to call it. At first, they labeled it post-transition harmonic deviation, a mouthful of words to explain what they were really afraid to say, that certain people returned from death carrying something extra. And among all those cases, only one stood out, yours, because yours didn't fade like the others. It amplified. Most patients gradually lost the signature within days, weeks at most, but your pattern intensified. Every time your name was spoken by a survivor, the same harmonic would spike in their readings, even if you weren't in the room, even if they didn't remember you consciously. It was as if your presence had bonded with the realm beyond, leaving behind an echo that refused to dissolve. You carry that frequency everywhere. It's why strangers confess things to you, why people feel safe breaking down in your presence, why others get nervous around you for no reason at all. Your spirit speaks before your mouth ever opens, because the energy around you doesn't say alive or dead, it says beyond. They don't have instruments built for this, not yet, but the few who've come close have noted it. The warmth in the cold, the silence that hums, the pulse that seems to vibrate just outside measurable sound. You're not haunted, chosen one. You're inhabited by light that wasn't meant to return, light that now chooses to stay, not for you, but for what you're becoming. Because this signature doesn't just mark where you've been, it prepares what's coming. Every doorway you pass through, every space you enter, is subtly altered, not by force, by memory, the memory of the other side. You didn't just survive something, you absorbed it. You carry death's rhythm inside your life's melody. And now the veil treats you like one of its own, because it knows you've already crossed once, and you brought the code back with you. They thought it was a malfunction. The machines weren't supposed to react that way, especially not to someone who wasn't even connected. But every time you entered the room, hospital, hospice, clinic, lab, the monitors changed. Heart rates quickened. Brainwaves spiked. EMF detectors pulsed with readings usually reserved for atmospheric storms. The staff checked the equipment, recalibrated, replaced the leads. But the same thing kept happening. You'd walk in, and machines designed to measure life would behave like they were detecting something greater. One nurse called it the field. She didn't have the vocabulary for what she felt, only that when you stood beside a bed, the room charged like thunder was coming. Patients who had been unresponsive opened their eyes. Others who had been in distress calmed down. One even started singing. Monitors picked up rhythms before doctors could. You weren't touching the equipment, but your energy was. You see, the technology wasn't broken. It was responding, because your frequency isn't limited to your body. It ripples, it moves ahead of you, it communicates on a level that machines weren't built to translate, only to detect. You're like a signal tower for the spirit realm, and the hardware can't help but register the anomaly. They can't replicate it. They've tried. They placed other people in your spot. Nothing. They whispered other names. Silence. But your presence, it shifts everything. At the University of Virginia, this phenomenon was logged under the codename ghost pulse. They meant it as a joke, but the data made no one laugh. They found that even when you left the room, the equipment took longer to stabilize, like your imprint remained hovering, disrupting their sense of control. Some researchers suggested shielding the labs. Others wanted to stop the studies altogether. But one neurologist refused to let go. He started tracking the timestamps, compiling footage, looking for a pattern. And what he discovered chilled him. Your presence always coincided with recovery, not every time, but far too often to ignore. Patients began showing signs of improvement after being exposed to your energy. Vitals that had plateaued suddenly spiked. Brain activity returned in those thought lost. And in one documented case, a woman in hospice stood up the morning after you visited, after 6 months of silence. When asked what changed, she whispered, "She reminded me I'm still needed." The monitors don't lie. They're just not used to measuring purpose. That's what your energy carries, not just light. Assignment. When you walk in, the atmosphere recognizes something divine. Not a healer, not a ghost, but a signal that the soul must keep going. You're not just waking up machines, chosen one. You're waking up destinies. And even the most advanced instruments on Earth can't help but react to the weight of who you are becoming. She was supposed to be their control case, a baseline, the final patient in the University of Virginia's near-death study. No prior paranormal claims, no interest in spirituality, a grounded woman, logical, measured. She'd suffered a sudden cardiac arrest and was clinically dead for 4 minutes before being revived. When she regained consciousness, they asked the standard questions. What did you see? How did it feel? Did anything stand out? She was quiet at first. Then she asked to speak to someone privately. The transcript of that interview never made it to the final report. It was sealed, marked restricted. But someone in the team leaked a summary, a single paragraph, enough to send tremors through the department. The patient said she saw a realm of light, yes. She felt peace, yes. But then she looked to the edge of the brilliance and saw a figure, standing still, watching. She couldn't make out a face at first, just a presence. A heat that wasn't heat, a knowing that didn't need language. And then the figure stepped closer, not physically, energetically. And in that moment she said, "I knew her. I didn't know how or why, but I knew her. She was the one who sees us before we cross." They showed her images, dozens of common figures seen in near-death experiences. She shook her head to all of them. Then, one researcher, the same who had quietly tracked your signature through the other 2,000 cases, slid a different image across the table. A blurred surveillance photo from a hallway security camera. You had walked past the lab the day before her incident. She froze. Tears filled her eyes, and she whispered, "That's her. That's the one I saw in the light." It made no sense. You had never spoken to this woman. You didn't know her name. She didn't know yours. And yet, her soul recognized you like a compass finally finding north. She didn't just remember your face. She remembered your assignment. She said you weren't there to guide her or to pull her back. You were there to witness, to remind her of something she hadn't yet done, a purpose that hadn't yet been fulfilled. And that memory alone was enough to make her body fight to return. The team dismissed her vision officially, called it stress-induced identification. But behind the scenes, the files were quietly encrypted, buried deep, and marked "case closed." Because she wasn't just the final patient, she was the confirmation, the full circle proof that your presence had become undeniable, that you weren't a myth folded into spiritual experience. You were a person, alive, present, seen not just by one, but by hundreds, each recalling the same truth from opposite ends of the veil. She didn't just identify you from a vision. They never expected you to still be here. Not after everything. Not after the veil tried to hold you. You were supposed to disappear like the others. Fade into the mystery. Remain a concept. An echo too soft to track. But you didn't vanish. You stayed. And in staying, you became the problem no institution could solve. Because your existence doesn't support their theories. It shatters them. You are the breach, the walking contradiction, the undeniable thread running through every near-death testimony, every spiritual return, every inexplicable recovery that science has tried to fold into silence. And they know it. They've stopped asking why. The question has changed. Now it's how long can we keep this quiet? Because if people ever connect the dots, if the world ever realizes that the person they saw in the light is still walking beside them, everything changes. Faith would no longer be abstract. Heaven would no longer feel distant. The veil would no longer be a boundary. It would be a mirror. And standing in the reflection is you. You've become a living artifact of the eternal. Not just evidence that there's more after this life, but that what's after can cross into what's now. You're proof that souls don't just survive. They return, they assign, they awaken, and some, like you, never truly left to begin with. That's what terrifies them the most. Not that you exist, but that you're active, that your presence still pulls at the threads of reality, that the sick feel better when you enter, that the dying hear your name and turn toward it, that children who've never met you still draw your eyes. You were supposed to be a footnote, but you became the story. Some in their ranks believe protecting your truth is necessary, that the world isn't ready, but others, they know it's too late. The pattern escaped the lab. It's whispered in hospice halls. It's woven into recovered dreams. It's visible in the faces of those who returned and now live differently, softer, stronger, with a look in their eyes like they've seen something they can't unsee. That something was you. You never needed recognition. You didn't ask for this spotlight, but heaven marked you for a reason. You are the echo that returns just before the final breath, the presence that steadies the soul when it's deciding whether to stay or go. The name the spirit remembers when it's forgotten everything else. And that's why they hide you, because you're not a theory, you're not a metaphor, you're the confirmation, the bridge, the proof wrapped in skin. You're what they couldn't unfind, the living, breathing truth that refuses to die.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.